What happens when a former royal sits down with Britain's most beloved talk show host and everything goes spectacularly wrong? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in television history, where Meghan Markle found herself in a heated exchange with Graham Norton that ended with her being asked to leave the show. This isn't just celebrity drama. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos clash and boundaries are crossed. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling me what you think really triggered this explosive confrontation. The red chair was spinning. The audience was buzzing with excitement. And Graham Norton was in his element, that familiar mischievous glint in his eye as he prepared to welcome his next guest. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, as it always was when the Graham Norton show was filming. But nobody, not the producers, not the audience, and certainly not Graham himself, could have predicted what was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Graham announced with his signature theatrical flair, gesturing toward the entrance as the audience erupted in applause. Meghan walked onto the set with her characteristic poise, wearing an elegant black dress that seemed to shimmer under the studio lights. She waved to the audience, that practiced smile never leaving her face as she made her way to the famous red sofa. "Meghan, wonderful to have you here," Graham said, standing to greet her with the customary air kisses. "You look absolutely stunning as always." "Thank you, Graham. It's lovely to be here," Meghan replied, settling into the plush cushions. But there was something in her tone, a subtle edge that suggested she might not be entirely comfortable with the traditional Norton treatment. Graham, ever the professional, launched into his opening with characteristic wit. "Now, Meghan, I have to say, you've been making quite the headlines lately. Some might say you're becoming Britain's most talked about export, even though you're not technically British anymore." The audience chuckled, but Meghan's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Graham, I think it's interesting how the media chooses to frame certain narratives. I'm here to talk about my new projects, not to relitigate the past." "Oh, but the past is so much more interesting than the present sometimes, isn't it?" Graham quipped, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mischief. "I mean, you've gone from suits to suits of armor, metaphorically speaking." "That's quite a journey." Meghan shifted in her seat, her media training kicking in as she maintained her composure. "I prefer to focus on moving forward, Graham. I'm here because I'm passionate about the work I'm doing now. The causes I believe in, right?" "Yes, of course." Graham nodded, but there was something in his expression that suggested he wasn't quite ready to let her off the hook. "But surely you can understand the public's fascination with your story. It's not every day someone walks away from a fairy tale." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly and her hands clasped together in her lap. "I think that's a rather simplistic way to view what was actually a very complex situation, Graham." "Oh, I'm sure it was complex," Graham replied, his tone walking the fine line between playful and pointed, "but from the outside looking in, it did seem rather like someone deciding the crown was too heavy, if you'll pardon the expression." The audience was beginning to sense the shift in atmosphere. What had started as typical Norton banter was beginning to feel less like entertainment and more like an interrogation. Meghan's media training was being put to the ultimate test. "Think," Meghan said carefully, "that there's a difference between choosing your own path and running away from responsibility." "I've never run away from anything in my life." Graham leaned forward slightly, his interviewer instincts fully activated now. "But would you say you've run towards something better? Because that's what everyone wants to know, isn't it? Was it worth it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, though she quickly masked it. "I don't think I need to justify my personal choices to anyone, Graham. Least of all on television." "Well, that's rather the point of being on television, isn't it?" Graham shot back with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "To talk about things. Otherwise, you could have just stayed home and sent a press release." The audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual Norton charm offensive. This was something else entirely. "I came here in good faith," Meghan said, her voice taking on a steely quality. "I was told this would be a friendly conversation about my current work, not a character assassination." Graham's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Character assassination? My dear Meghan, I'm simply asking questions that any reasonable person might ask. Surely you expected that. I expected professionalism, Meghan replied coolly. I expected to be treated with the same respect you show your other guests. Oh, but I am treating you with respect, Graham insisted, his voice dripping with that particular brand of British passive aggression. I'm treating you like any other public figure who makes controversial choices and then expects everyone to simply accept them without question. The gloves were officially off now. Meghan straightened in her chair, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the fire beneath. Controversial choices. I made choices that were right for me and my family. I don't recall asking for your approval, Graham. No, but you did ask for the public's attention, Graham countered smoothly. And with attention comes scrutiny. Surely someone as media savvy as yourself understands that basic equation. The studio felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Even the camera operators seemed to sense they were capturing something extraordinary, something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. I understand plenty, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. I understand that some people can't accept when someone refuses to play by their rules. I understand that some people would rather tear someone down than build them up. Graham's smile never wavered, but there was steel in his voice now. And I understand that some people like to play the victim when they're called out for their choices. But surely you can't expect to rewrite history simply because you don't like how it reflects on you. The audience was holding its collective breath. This had gone far beyond typical celebrity interview territory and entered something much more dangerous. That last exchange had crossed a line, and everyone in the studio knew it. Meghan's eyes flashed with indignation as she processed Graham's words about playing the victim. The carefully constructed facade of polite television discourse was crumbling. By the second, excuse me, Meghan's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Did you just accuse me of playing the victim? That's incredibly rich coming from someone who's built an entire career on gossiping about other people's lives. Graham's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. Oh, I wouldn't call it gossiping, Meghan. I prefer to think of it as professional curiosity. After all, when someone makes the choices you've made, people are naturally going to have questions. Questions. Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. These aren't questions, Graham. This is a hit job. You've dragged me onto your show, under false pretenses to ambush me with your tired old talking points. The audience was transfixed. Some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others were leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single word of this unprecedented television moment. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue. Ambush. Graham's voice rose slightly, his own composure beginning to crack. My dear woman, you're the one who agreed to come on the show. Nobody forced you to sit in that chair. I agreed to come on your show to talk about my work, not to be subjected to your petty judgments about my personal life, Meghan shot back. But clearly, you had a different agenda from the start. Graham leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from playful to genuinely annoyed. My agenda is to entertain my audience by having honest conversations with my guests. If you can't handle honest conversation, perhaps you shouldn't be doing television interviews. Honest conversation. Meghan's voice was rising. Now, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. There's nothing honest about this, Graham. You've been baiting me from the moment I sat down, trying to get me to say something you can use against me. I don't need to use anything against you, Graham replied coolly. Your own words and actions speak quite loudly enough. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this battle of wills unfold with a kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car crashes. Even the musicians in the corner seemed frozen, their instruments forgotten. My actions, Meghan's voice cracked slightly with emotion. What actions, Graham? Leaving a situation that was toxic, protecting my family, choosing my own happiness over public approval. Which of those actions exactly do you find so objectionable? Graham's eyes glittered with something that might have been triumph. Oh, I don't find them objectionable at all. What I find objectionable is the way you've spent the last few years trying to convince everyone that you're the innocent party in all of this. Innocent party. Meghan was fully animated now, her hands gesturing emphatically. I've never claimed to be innocent of anything. I've simply refused to accept responsibility for things that weren't my fault. And what about the things that were your fault? Graham pressed, sensing weakness. Surely you can admit that some of your choices had consequences you didn't anticipate. Meghan's jaw clenched visibly. Of course, my choices had consequences. Every choice has consequences, but I'm not going to apologize for choosing my own well-being over other people's expectations. Other people's expectations. Graham's voice dripped with sarcasm. Is that what you call duty now? Expectations. The word hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Meghan's eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually get up and leave. But instead, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Don't you dare lecture me about duty, Graham Norton. You sit here in your comfortable studio making jokes about other people's pain and you think that gives you the right to judge their choices. I'm not judging anyone's choices, Graham replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm simply pointing out that choices have consequences, and sometimes those consequences affect more than just the person making the choice. And what would you know about the consequences of my choices? Meghan's voice was shaking now. Whether with rage or emotion, it was impossible to tell. Were you there when I was being torn apart by the press? Were you there when I was struggling with my mental health? Were you there when I realized I had to choose between my family's safety and some abstract notion of duty? Graham's expression softened slightly, as if he realized he might have pushed too far. Of course, I wasn't there, Meghan. But neither were any of us. We can only judge by what we see and what we're told. Exactly, Meghan said, her voice gaining strength. You can only judge by what you see and what you're told. And what you've been told is a story that's been carefully crafted to make me look like the villain. Nobody's trying to make you look like a villain, Graham protested. Though his tone lacked conviction. Aren't they? Meghan challenged. Then why are we having this conversation? Why aren't you asking me about my charity work or my new projects or anything else I'm actually here to discuss? Graham paused, clearly struggling with how to respond. The audience could sense his discomfort and some were beginning to shift their sympathies toward Meghan because Graham said finally, those aren't the questions that matter to people. People want to understand why you made the choices you made. No, Meghan said firmly. People want to judge me for the choices I made. There's a difference. The tension in the studio was reaching a breaking point. Both participants seemed to realize they were engaged in something far more serious than a typical celebrity interview. This was a battle for narrative control, and neither was willing to back down. Perhaps, Graham said carefully, we should move on to discussing your current projects. But Meghan wasn't ready to let it go. Oh no, Graham. You wanted to have this conversation, so let's have it. Let's talk about why you and so many others seem to think you have the right to dictate how I should live my life. Graham's composure was slipping now, his famous charm replaced by something harder and more defensive. I don't think I have the right to dictate anything, but I do think public figures have a responsibility to their public. A responsibility to be miserable, Meghan shot back. A responsibility to sacrifice their happiness for other people's comfort. That's not responsibility, Graham. That's servitude. The word servitude seemed to hit Graham like a physical blow. His face flushed slightly and his voice took on a sharper edge. That's a very dramatic way to describe service to one's country. Service to one's country. Meghan laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? Because from where I was sitting, it looked a lot more like being fed to the wolves for public entertainment. The metaphor of being fed to the wolves had struck a nerve, and Graham's face showed it. His usual composure was completely gone now, replaced by something raw and confrontational that his audience had never seen before. Fed to the wolves, Graham's voice was incredulous. You were given every privilege, every opportunity, every advantage that money and position could provide. If that's being fed to the wolves, then most people would gladly volunteer for the feeding. Meghan's eyes flashed with pure fury. Privilege. You think being systematically destroyed by the media is a privilege. You think having your mental health dismissed and your concerns ignored is an advantage. I think Graham said, his voice, rising to match hers, that you had a choice to make it work, and you chose not to. That's not being destroyed. That's giving up. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row looked genuinely shocked at the harshness of Graham's words. This had gone far beyond entertainment into something deeply personal and brutal. Giving up. Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. I fought for 3 years, Graham. 3 years of trying to make it work while being torn apart piece by piece. How long exactly was I supposed to endure that before I was allowed to prioritize my own survival? Graham seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. I'm not saying you should have endured anything. I'm saying you could have found a way to make it work without burning every bridge behind you. Burning bridges. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The only bridges I burned were the ones that were already on fire. I simply refused to stand on them while they collapsed. The studio was in complete chaos now. Producers were frantically gesturing from the wings. Audience members were whispering to each other and camera operators were trying to decide where to focus their attention. Oh, please, Graham said, also rising from his chair. You're painting yourself as some kind of victim of circumstances. But the truth is, you made calculated decisions that benefited you personally. Benefited me. Meghan's voice was shaking with rage. You think leaving everything I'd worked for, facing constant public scrutiny, and having my reputation systematically destroyed, benefited me? What exactly do you think I gained from any of this? Graham's expression was cold now. All pretense of friendliness abandoned. You gained your freedom, didn't you? You gained the ability to monetize your story on your own terms. You gained a platform to play the victim whenever it suits you. That was the final straw. Meghan's face went white with fury, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. How dare you? How dare you stand there and accuse me of monetizing my pain? How dare you suggest that I put myself and my family through hell for financial gain? I'm not suggesting anything, Graham replied coldly. I'm stating facts. You left. You wrote your book. You did your interviews. You started your projects. If that's not monetizing your story, what is? The audience was completely silent now, watching in horror as this confrontation reached its crescendo. Several people looked like they wanted to leave, but were too transfixed by the spectacle to move. The fact that you can reduce everything I've been through to a business transaction tells me everything I need to know about you, Meghan said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. You're not a journalist, Graham. You're not even a good interviewer. You're just another bully. Hiding behind a microphone, Graham's face flushed red. Now, wait just a minute. I've been doing this job for decades, and I've never had a guest accuse me of being a bully. Well, congratulations, Meghan said sarcastically. There's a first time for everything. Perhaps, Graham said, his voice dangerously quiet. If you can't handle the basic questions that come with being a public figure, you shouldn't be a public figure. Meghan laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any humor. Basic questions you call character assassination. Basic questions you call psychological manipulation. Basic journalism, I call it holding people accountable for their choices. Graham shot back. Something you seem to have a problem with. The only thing I have a problem with, Meghan said, grabbing her purse from beside the chair, is wasting my time talking to someone who clearly made up his mind about me before I even walked through that door. Graham's eyes narrowed. So now you're leaving. How predictable. When the going gets tough, Meghan Markle gets going. The insult hit its mark. Meghan turned back to face him, her eyes blazing with fury. You know what, Graham? You're right. I am leaving because I don't have to sit here and be insulted by a man who thinks his opinions are more important than basic human decency. Human decency. Graham's voice dripped with sarcasm. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of throwing her own family under the bus. The audience gasped again. This was beyond anything they could have imagined when they entered the studio that evening. Several people were now openly uncomfortable, some covering their mouths in shock. That's enough, Meghan said, her voice deadly calm. I'm done here. She turned to leave, but Graham wasn't finished. Of course you're done. You're always done when someone challenges your narrative. Meghan stopped dead in her tracks. When she turned back, her face was a mask of cold fury. My narrative. You want to know what my narrative is, Graham? My narrative is that I'm a human being who made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. My narrative is that I refuse to be destroyed by people who see other people's pain as entertainment. And my narrative, Graham replied, his voice matching her coldness, is that you're someone who can't take responsibility for the consequences of your own actions. The two stood facing each other like gladiators in an arena, the studio audience. The unwilling witnesses to this devastating confrontation. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating. "You know what?" Meghan said finally. "I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. I know who I am, and I know what I've been through. Your opinion of me says more about you than it does about me." She turned to leave again, but this time, Graham's voice stopped her. "Security will show you out." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The audience couldn't believe what they were hearing. Graham Norton, beloved television host, was actually having a guest removed from his show. Meghan turned back one final time, her dignity intact, despite everything that had just transpired. "I don't need security to escort me out, Graham. I'm perfectly capable of walking out on my own, which, as you've so eloquently pointed out, seems to be something I'm very good at." With that, she walked toward the exit, her head held high, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members and a host who had just witnessed his reputation crumble in real time. As the studio doors closed behind her, Graham stood alone on his set, the weight of what had just happened settling over him like a dark cloud. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they should applaud, boo, or simply sit in shocked contemplation of what they had just witnessed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how one of television's most beloved hosts learned that sometimes when you push too hard, people push back even harder. What started as a routine celebrity interview had ended with one of the most dramatic exits in television history, leaving everyone involved forever changed by the experience. What do you think really caused this confrontation to spiral so completely out of control? Was it Graham's aggressive questioning, Meghan's refusal to be controlled, or something deeper about the nature of celebrity and accountability? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this.